Welcome to episode 5, the Jimi Hendrix story as you've never heard it before. In the mid-1960s, it was widely acknowledged that the club scene in and around London was unrivalled, standing as the pinnacle of its kind worldwide. Moreover, it was not just the best but also the largest, boasting a multitude of clubs scattered across central London and its suburbs. This vibrant landscape had been steadily evolving since the early 1950s, primarily fueled by the burgeoning interest in jazz within post-war Britain. As the late 1950s approached, jazz clubs were accompanied by the emergence of folk clubs, and even for a brief period, rock and roll clubs made their mark. However, the scene experienced a tremendous explosion in 1964 when the Rolling Stones skyrocketed to fame, coinciding with the rise of British rhythm and blues. This cultural shift was intertwined with a sudden fascination with fashion, epitomized by the renowned Carnaby Street. Pop culture permeated every corner of society. Despite the pervasive pop image, individuals exhibited diverse appearances and tastes. There were mods, beatniks, and lingering rockers, each with their distinct styles, music preferences, and club scenes. Some elements of the scene were rooted in the working class, while others, particularly the art school and beatnik factions, hailed from more middle-class backgrounds. Curiously, despite the purportedly egalitarian spirit of the era, certain aspects even had an upper-class touch. During the initial years, there was a degree of homogeneity within the scene. However, with the arrival of Jimi Hendrix in late 1966, fragmentation began to set in. This division was partially based on the aforementioned class distinctions. Rhythm and blues had managed to unify the youth of the time, but by late 1966, most working-class youngsters, primarily the mods, started gravitating towards soul and Motown sounds. On the other hand, the art school crowd leaned toward a more purist blues style, albeit infused with electricity. The two groups, easily identifiable by their increasingly apparent sartorial differences, regarded each other with mutual disdain, although on the whole, the mods tended to favor a sense of tension, while the other side embraced tolerance. Released on 16th of December 1966, and with the entry of Hey Joe in the charts in January of 1967, along with their TV appearances on Ready, Steady, Go and Top of the Pops, by early 1967, Jimi Hendrix and the Experience had set the rock and roll circus in motion. With interviews, photo calls, recording sessions, and an ever-growing list of club dates, which, if you include all the traveling time between gigs up and down the country, meant they very rapidly found themselves with no free time. It had taken the best part of 4 months for the momentum to pick up. Now it was relentless. Jimi received the across-the-board media attention in England that would have been impossible in America, where there is no national TV, radio or press, simply because the country is too big. The following is a list of gigs and appearances the band performed in January of 1967. The first, rehearsals. The fourth, performing at the Bromwell Club, Bromley, Kent, with a long hour-and-a-quarter set. The fifth and sixth, interviews including photos for Fabulous magazine. The seventh, performing at New Century Hall, Manchester, earnings £38. The eighth, the Mojo Club in Sheffield. The ninth, photos at 7.5 Club. Record Hey Joe Stone Free reaches 25 in the New Musical Express charts, 15 in Disc magazine charts, and reaches 26 in the Melody Maker charts. 11th, recording Purple Haze at CBS with John Mayall at the session. 12th, personal appearance at Racecar Show for Radio London, then a gig later at the 7.5 Club London for a performance fee of £35. 13th, again at the 7.5 Club London. The 14th, performing at the Beachcomber in Nottingham. The 15th, performing at the Kirk Levington Country Club in Yorkshire. The 16th, performing at the 7.5 Club London. And Hey Joe reaches 7 in New Musical Express charts. The 18th, radio, Ready, Steady, and later performing at the 7.5 Club London. The 18th, interview with David Frost, and an appearance on BBC TV, Top of the Pops, paid £75, then later another performance at the 7.5 Club, the 19th performing at the Speakeasy Club, London, earning £47, the 20th performing at the Haverstock Hill Country Club, London, where Jimi's amp blew, the 21st performing at Golders Green, London, the 22nd, the Astoria, Oldham, Lancashire, 24th, photo session and rehearsal, the later at the Marquee, where they broke the crowd record, which still holds. The 25th, Oxford Cellar in Norwich, which according to Noel was the smallest, hottest place they'd ever played in, and with terrible sound. 27th, Chislehurst Caves in London, to a crowd of 2,000. Earnings £50. 28th, Uppercut Club, London, Forest Gate, to a crowd of 5,000. The 29th, the Savile Theatre with The Who, 2 half-hour shows with bad amps. The 30th, Radio, Pop North, terrible sound according to Noel. And the last day of the month, the 31st of January, filming early till 5:30 at the Savile for Kit Lambert for a promo film. As Mitch Mitchell recalls, I'm sure we did Wind Cries Mary twice. That was at Kingsway again. We did a demo version on a Friday night and it was ragged, to put it mildly. We went off over the weekend, did some gigs, went back the following Tuesday and got it right, but the initial feeling wasn't there, so the original was released, warts and all. Thank goodness it's one of my favourites. Stone Free was a Hendrix original, of course. I don't know if he brought it over with him. After those initial words we had, you know, Christ Almighty, we must have some new material, he started writing really quickly. I think he brought over a scrapbook with ideas, and some of those got translated into proper songs, or at least sketches to songs that we worked out in the studio. One thing I always found surprising about Jimmy was that he'd not spent much time in the American school system. In fact, they'd given him a rough time, and by his own admission he didn't enjoy it, which is why he chose to join the army at a young age. Despite that, he was incredibly literate and in possession of a great deal of wisdom. I've really no idea where it came from, but what a gift for words. Apart from anything else, it really came out when he started writing songs. The song was written in the wake of a cataclysmic row between Kathy Etchingham, whose middle name is Mary, and Jimmy. Although they cared a lot for each other, Jimmy and I used to have terrible rows. We'd fight like cat and dog, screaming and shouting, but at the end of the day there was not a thing that Jimmy would have done against me. Kathy cannot remember the source of this particular row, but seems to think it all started when Jimmy accused her of using dirty pans to cook with. As Kathy recalls, I hit him with a frying pan, plates and glasses went flying, we smashed the kitchen up. It was a horrific argument, really nasty stuff. He locked me in the bathroom for absolutely ages and wouldn't let me out. He went out and left me locked in the bloody bathroom. Eventually Chaz's girlfriend Lotta let me out. I stormed outside and Jimmy was sitting there in his black cloak. I got into a taxi and he called out, "Where are you going?" Kathy went to see her best friend, Eric Burden's wife Angie. When I got back, he had done most of the clearing up and he had the whole song written out. "I wrote a song," he said, and handed me a piece of paper with "The Wind Cries Mary" written on it. Mary was my middle name and the one he would use when he wanted to annoy me. I took the song and read it through. It was about the row we had just had, but I didn't feel the least bit appeased. The Wind Cries Mary demonstrates that Jimmy could adopt an almost technical approach to the construction of chord patterns and embellishments. The song captures the mood of the Curtis Mayfield Bobby Womack guitar style, with sliding fourths and open tuning, which so informed the more melodic aspects of Jimmy's playing. Around the same time as Hendrix was completing Purple Haze, he had been composing a long poem about relationships between men and women. Hendrix was a vocal opponent of traditional marriage, which became a song started and completed the same day, as Chandler recalls. 51st Anniversary was recorded on January 11th, 1967. That was the B-side. A great recording, I always loved that song. It features 5 guitar overdubs all linking in together to sound like one guitar. Hendrix was brilliant. We would record on 4-track, premix down to 2-track, fill those up, and overdub again. 51st Anniversary also prominently featured Hendrix's lead vocal, a difficult victory for Chandler. I had arguments with him about where his voice should go, Chandler says. He would always want to bury his voice, but I loved its rhythm and thought it was great. Not only were the ideas coming fast and furious, 51st Anniversary featured Hendrix's first real injection of attitude into his recordings, most notably his fake joint smoking, which appears not once but twice, and his bolder side. That was the good side, baby. Here comes the bad side. While tame in comparison to Fire, and its move over Rover, let Jimi take over. It did signal Hendrix's first combination of his stage persona with the experience's outrageous, by the 1966 standards, image. The difference between Hey Joe, with its recording serving as an audition for Mitchell and Redding, and Purple Haze, was a marked one, says Chandler. Purple Haze probably took longer to record than any of the other earlier records. With Hey Joe, I didn't know how to run the place. I was just a dumb bass player trying to become a record producer. With Purple Haze, Hendrix and I were searching for a sound and just kept going back in, 2 hours at a time, trying to achieve it. A lot of background sound on Purple Haze is actually a recording being fed back into the studio through the earphones held around the microphone, moving them in and out to create a weird echo. It wasn't like we were in there for days on end. We recorded it, and then Hendrix and I would be sitting at home saying, "Let's try that." Then we would go in for an hour or two. That's how it was in those days. However long it took to record one specific idea, and that's how long we would book. We kept going in and out. The spur-of-the-moment ideas included the oohs and ahs, provided by Redding, who laughingly recalls Chandler sending him to the vocal booth to contribute them. As absurd as they may have been, they made the final version what it was. This is what Jimi Hendrix had to say in his own words. "We all dug Hey Joe as a number, so we put it down on record. While we were working on it, I don't think we played it the same way twice. Lots of people have done different arrangements of it, and Timmy Rose was the first to do it slowly. I liked it played slowly. There are probably 1,000 versions of it fast, by the Byrds, Standalls, Love and others. It was the first time I ever tried to sing on a record. I was too scared to sing. Chaz made me sing serious. I just wish I could sing really nice, but I know I can't. I just feel the words out. I try all night to hit a pretty note, but I'm more like an entertainer and performer than a singer. Guitar is the basic thing for me. Voice is just another way of getting across what I'm doing musically. Hey Joe is really a blues arrangement of a cowboy song. It isn't quite a commercial song, so I'm surprised that it got so high in the hit parade. I'm just wondering how people are going to take the next one, because it's so different. They'd picked out Love or Confusion to be our next single, but I had this thing on my mind about a dream I had that I was walking under the sea. It's linked to a story I read in a science fiction magazine about a purple death ray. It's called Purple Haze. Excuse me. It's about his guy who doesn't know which way he's going. This girl turned this cat on, and he doesn't know if it's good or bad, that's all. It could be stuff like going into different strange areas like most curious people do. It's nothing to do with drugs. The key to the meaning of the song lies in the line, "That girl put a spell on me." Of course, Jimi Hendrix was a person, subject to human frailties, as Kathy Etchingham reveals. Living together as two couples had its problems because Jimi and I tended to have very loud rows, whereas Lotta never raised her voice or argued with Chaz at all. They complained they were able to hear us going for one another from their room upstairs. Jimi was difficult to deal with, as more than anyone, Chaz was to find out. He always did what he wanted, regardless of how it might affect other people, and when he wanted something, he wanted it immediately, whether it was possible or not. He was particularly frustrated by the lack of decent food in England at the time. We'd been brought up at the tail end of rationing and wartime shortages, and British standards of catering left a lot to be desired. New Yorkers, though, nothing of wandering out in the middle of the night and having a range of different restaurants and takeaways to choose from. London was still a long way behind. On top of that, my cooking skills and interest in food were virtually nil and a cause of many of our disagreements. Having rows never worried either of us much. I guess we had both listened to enough of them throughout our childhoods not to take them too seriously. We could be shouting and screaming one moment and forgetting about the whole thing next. Chaz became so disturbed about our apparently stormy relationship that eventually he and Mike Jeffrey called Jimi up to Mike's management office in Gerrard Street and suggested that if we didn't stop rowing, I was going to have to move out. They put it to him that we should split up anyway, because they thought I was interfering with his creativity. Jimi told them to mind their own business. Then Chaz tried another tack, taking to the side of the sitting room at home and asking whether I didn't think it would be better for us to go our separate ways. I was somewhat taken aback, having though our relationship was going rather well. Chaz told me he was worried that we might start rowing in public and that would damage Jimi's image. He didn't think a black singer at that time could risk behaving badly. He was always aware that Jimmy might get thrown out of the country if he drew too much adverse publicity. According to Noel Redding, just to keep things in perspective, not everyone loved us. We still had wretched nights when the audience hated us and every note we played. There were also personal bad moments. In Manchester, we borrowed a van to go to the Twisted Wheel Club. They refused us entry, and then the plainclothes police showed up. I was nervous because of driving without proper insurance. They started searching and found an anti-smoking cigarettes pill in my wallet. I tried to tell them what it was, but they were looking for the bust of the century, so they hit me in the face and knocked my glasses off. They left Jimmy alone because he was a foreigner, and in those days, exempt from police harassment. Very educational, but from now on I had little spare time to dwell on anything good or bad. If I had an afternoon off, I escaped to the fantasy world of the cinema. Mitch tells the story. Before Hey Joe came out and became a hit, Chaz had booked Jimmy to do a tour of the working men's clubs in the north of England. He tried to get Jimmy out of it once it was obvious that he could pull bigger crowds at other venues, but the contracts were watertight, and there was nothing we could do, so he had to honor them. Jimmy wasn't too bothered, happy to play anywhere if there was an audience. One of the first gigs up north was the New Century Hall on a Saturday night, January 7th, 1967. We went back to our hotel after we'd played, changed our clothes, and decided to go to the clubs to see what was going on, places like the Twisted Wheel. I knew the owners well from the Blue Flames days, but none of them would let us in. Sorry, Mitch, can't let you in. Come back in an hour's time. It turned out the police were busting people for being underage or something. After about the third club, we walked over to the car and suddenly Noel and I were grabbed and slung against the railings of the police station. We got slapped around a few times and I was going, "What the fuck's going on?" They were police, but we didn't believe it at first. They were all in plain clothes. They took Jimmy's passport off him, but they left him alone as he was an American. But they hung Noel on the railings. They searched the car but didn't find anything. It really shook us up, though. We went back to the hotel and phoned up Mike Jeffrey, and managed to get through for once. Eventually 2 cops were thrown off the force because of it. It only got reported in one paper, though, the Sheffield Sunday Examiner or whatever. As a band, we rarely, if ever, experienced any violence. In my early days in bands, however, I remember going to Glasgow, where if they threw bottles at you, they liked you. They had chicken wire in front of the stage there, like that scene in the Blues Brothers. Hendrix had been through all that too, on the Chitlin circuit. Those were common experiences that all bands had. If you were in a band, you were in a band. You knew about all that stuff and accepted it together. Colour never entered into it at all, certainly not in England. English audiences were used to integrated bands, and maybe that was a difference for Hendrix, experiencing that possibly for the first time outside of Greenwich Village. Noel Redding explains, "Things changed fast and our days settled into a routine. Up late, travel, gig, get pissed, crawl into bed between 4 and 8 in the morning. Most of our days we spent in brain and body-numbing travel, covering every corner of England and much of the middle. It was like being with the Burnetts all over again. Usually Stickles drove the van and we'd pack ourselves in with the gear. I'd squeeze in between the roof and the equipment because there weren't enough seats. Sometimes we had the luxury of Neil and his car, and we'd share the driving. We avoided asking Mitch to drive. Jimmy and I got into a car with Mitch driving once and swore we'd never make that mistake again. And Jimmy could get used to driving on the left in England. The roads were cowpaths compared to what they are now. We'd get back at some forsaken time of the morning and drag ourselves up to my place where we would sit, each in a corner with a beer and a hash joint, relaxing in silent thoughts we were often too tired to share. It was during these moments that I turned Jimmy on to my small record collection, the Kinks, the Small Faces, and most enjoyably, the Goons. We were constantly skint. Even Jimmy, who had no immediate accommodation problems, borrowed a few shillings here and there. There were so many more expenses, especially the fancy and expensive stage clothes. Our accelerating popularity increased the numbers of hangers-on, and the pressure accelerated our drinking. It was difficult to leave anywhere without at least 2 girls on each arm. I was seeing about a dozen birds regularly. I think I spent most of January in bed. After a radio appearance on the 17th of January, we ran up a huge bar bill of over £2. Even pooling our money, we couldn't cover it.